Shalom from Jerusalem. This is day 522 of the war, which started on October the 7th, 2023, by the Hamas in the horrific massacre perpetrated against civilians as well as military and security forces in the Israeli southern district of the Negev. And this is the Israel at War update on TV7 News. I'm Amir Oren, sitting in for Jonathan Hessen, and my guests are Mr. Oded Elam, formerly a senior official with Mossad, including as the head of the Counterterrorism Center. Mr. Elam, welcome.
Thank you for having me.
And Ori Sachar, among other duties, the Director of Research for Israel's Bitchonistim movement, which is composed of former military and security officers interested in promoting Israel's defense and security needs. So welcome to you, Or, too.
Thank you for having me.
The major international news of the last 24 hours or so came out of Jeddah, Saudi Arabia, with the announcement that the Ukraine is now ready for a 30-day ceasefire with Russia, during which time they will try to negotiate a more permanent truce, and as President Trump is hopeful, even peace. Now, without going into the details of what is happening there between Russia and Ukraine, with American mediation, under Saudi auspices, what does it mean for the Israeli defense needs, especially vis-a-vis Gaza? Does it mean that the Israeli account has gone down the priority ladder, that the Trump administration is now focusing its attention elsewhere, and therefore lost some of the urgency regarding the Gaza ceasefire, which is still holding, but the future is in doubt? Or should we learn from it that the same formula which Secretary of State Rubio and his colleagues are pushing, that is what a former American Secretary of State, William Rogers, phrased in 1970, stop shooting and start talking, could that apply to the Israeli-Palestinian arena too?
It's difficult to relate to that at this very preliminary phase of the ceasefire between Ukraine and Russia. We don't know yet what is going to be the outcome. We don't know yet if it is feasible. We don't know yet what's going to be the terms of both parties in going into negotiation table. But having said that, it definitely reflects the strive of the American administration to some sort of a deal. Let's not forget, Trump book was the deal maker. He is a deal maker in his concept, in his philosophy, and he actually wants to cut some sort of agreement in Gaza as soon as possible in order to get rid of the matter and to go on with his goals, which are geopolitical goals, mainly confrontation with China.
If you consider the fact that the administration is grateful to Mohammed bin Salman and to the Saudi authorities in general for hosting this second meeting. First, there was the meeting with the Russians headed by Lavrov. Now this one with the Ukrainian ministers, foreign affairs and defense, as well as the presidential advisor. Does that give MBS more clout? And if that's so, and considering that the Saudis have not been supportive of the original Trump idea of relocating all of the Gazans out of the Strip during the many years of reconstruction, what does it mean regarding the American-Saudi relationship? And there was, of course, also the possibility that Trump will visit Saudi Arabia. Of course, in 2017, it was the very first place he went to.
Yeah, look, I mean, I think all sides are posturing here, really. So the United States is attempting to safeguard its own interests, and the Saudis would love to have this mediation position that they currently have. Right now, this makes them players on the table, and it's better to be on the table than on the menu, as they say in the Middle East. So whatever position and influence they may have, they welcome it. Same goes for Egypt and Qatar with the mediation between Israel and Hamas. So they want to be relevant actors, and Trump sees it. That would perhaps make them more inclined for concessions with Israel, because you did me such a big favor with Ukraine, you can't walk away now. So that could have been one of the considerations. But you see how certainly Trump said he intends to visit Saudi Arabia, maybe not his first visit. We saw how Trump attempts not to recreate every single aspect of his first term, starting from the pick for the press secretary and loyal secretaries that surround him, the Secretary of Defense, Secretary of State, to having very clear order, having Susie Wiles as his chief of staff, and making sort of a drama-free zone in the Oval Office. All these things, we see how President Trump is much more, I would say, prepared for the job, much more familiar with Washington, and ready to basically promote not only the U.S. agenda, but his own agenda. And that's, I believe, okay for an American president, but certainly there is a lot more of a personal aspect to it. And he expects the Saudis to return a favor. Now, it meets Israel right at the point where we need Trump the most, but that would be the wrong way to approach it. Israel, in that case, is behaving in an intelligent way, unlike the Ukrainians, who honestly poked the bear, tried to antagonize Trump again and again, especially with that very fiery meeting of Zelensky at the Oval Office. Honestly, it was pretty puzzling to understand what kind of strategy are we witnessing here. Israel finally, after many years, one should say, learned how to say not to say no because, but to say yes but. These are very different things. So the Ukrainians chose the strategy of antagonizing the Americans, while the Americans say, look, we can't put everything on the table right now. Agree to the minerals deal, agree to a 30-day ceasefire, and let's see. It doesn't bind your hands at any point in the future. So you should say yes sometimes in order to gain something down the road. Israel understands that now. And so we agree to the ceasefire with Hamas, to the release of hostages, even though many heavy, as we say in Hebrew, or many kind of notorious Palestinian prisoners with a lot of blood on their hands and murdered multiple Israelis, including Rabbi Mark some 10 years ago, and buses that exploded in Haifa and Tel Aviv, people who have really dozens of Israelis murdered because of them. Israel agreed to release them because it understands that President Trump needs some low-hanging fruits. We need some victories here, and then we'll see later on. He will be much more inclined to allow Israel to do more in Gaza later if you say yes to some sort of a compromise deal right now.
We may have a distinguished American guest joining us if we manage to establish the connection. But in the meantime, here he is, General Mark Kimmett. Welcome. How are you?
Sorry I'm late. Had some technical difficulties over here.
You mean daylight savings time? The clock has moved?
Technical difficulties with life. I can't read a clock.
Okay. Welcome. We were talking just before you joined us about the implications of the focus on Russia, Ukraine, regarding Israel, Hamas, or Gaza. And the question was, does it mean that the administration right now has lost some of the attention it earlier gave our own region? Or conversely, could one read from the formula suggested by Secretary Rubio and others, stop shooting and start talking, that this is what the administration will try to suggest to Israel and Hamas?
Well, there have actually been some rumors that the United States is engaged with talks with Hamas at present. I don't think the United States has lost its focus at the administration level. It certainly seems to have fallen below the fold in the newspapers and in the media. But I don't think that the United States has lost focus as much as it's just other events being at the front of the line rather than Hamas and Hezbollah as it was for so many months.
Could you please walk us baffled foreigners, having, as Trump usually says, a big, beautiful ocean, or more than one, between us, through the maze of this new administration? We've all heard about the cabinet secretaries, especially Rubio, versus Elon Musk. And then we see that there are at least two special emissaries, envoys, Witkoff and Bueller. And it doesn't seem as if it is all synchronized. What are we to make out of it?
Well, first of all, it is true that President Trump is very much a centralized leader. He likes to take calls. He likes to make calls. He spends most of his day on the telephone, so he gets advice directly and rather through what all of us know as the process, the chain of command. But having said that, special envoys are not new. Under the Obama administration, the State Department had 22 separate envoys, ranging from the Middle East to issues such as women's rights. So he is very close to Steve Witkoff. He trusts Steve Witkoff, and up to this point, Witkoff is doing pretty much of a good deal. When you talk about Witkoff and Rubio, you also have to interject Mike Waltz, his national security advisor, who is very, very close to him on issues of foreign policy. But the coordination, unlike in normal administrations, which is typically done at the cabinet ministerial level, that coordination is very much being done by Trump himself.
I haven't introduced you yet, Brigadier General retired Mark Kimmett, formerly a senior U.S. Army and joint officer, including duties at CENTCOM and as the Assistant Secretary of State for Political and Military Affairs. So welcome again. And we hope that the technical difficulties will not overcome our conversation. Oded Elam, let me ask you regarding one of the topics being mentioned as part of the deal that the administration is trying either directly or through the mediators get between Hamas and Israel. The idea, which is hardly new, it was mentioned in the very first week of this war and is based on the precedent of Yasser Arafat being evicted from Beirut in 1992. The idea that Hamas, whether it's the Hamas leadership or all of the Hamas armed personnel, be gone from Gaza to whatever country will agree to take them on. Is that in the cards, or is there no way for Hamas to leave Gaza?
Well, currently the Hamas has no incentive to leave Gaza simply because of the fact that they are not under any sort of either military pressure or diplomatic pressure to go along with this new idea. In order to initiate such a move, which it has a tremendous impact on the Hamas and an impact on the jihadic claim of Sumud, which is sticking to the ground. You have to rely on pretty much strong military pressure that will actually enhance some inner opposition within the Hamas leadership, saying, look, if we oppose that, that's the end of the Muslim Brotherhood around the world, not just in Gaza. Let's not forget, the only place in the world where the Muslim Brotherhood has sovereignty, as actually ruling a place, it's in Gaza. So in order to facilitate such a very dramatic move, it has to come along both with military pressure and with diplomatic pressure and economic pressure to choke the Hamas within the Gaza restriction. And right now, I don't see it as a feasible idea.
General Kimmett, you wanted to add to the conversation?
Yeah, and I think there's a practical aspect to that as well. Hamas knows that billions will be pumped into Gaza for reconstruction. They're in terrible financial state right now. Their main patron, Iran, doesn't look like it's going to be a significant amount of help. So through the billions that are pumped in, inevitably Hamas will become millionaires individually and also be able to fund their organization through bribery, through graft, through extortion.
Or what's your view? If not exile, what other possibility is short of resumed fighting and a fight to the finish, if that's possible, and if that does not endanger the hostages? There are some 22 to 24 living hostages, Israeli hostages, including a dual national, Idan Alexander, in Gaza, and another 35 or so bodies of Israelis who were abducted. What can be done?
Yeah, I mean, obviously, this mounting pressure on Hamas or even resuming the fighting could involve such an element. But you can also argue that leaving them there without mounting pressure on Hamas really is just counting the minutes until they are continuing to suffer. And I think Hamas understands that. That's why it abducted them in the first place, in order to use them as bargaining chips in negotiations. And then Hamas knows full well that once it relinquishes the hostages and lets them go, really it remains with no cards on the table. And that's really the tragic aspect of it. It knows it full well, and so it wants to use it to the full extent. It will only happen, meaning Hamas will only release the hostages, the living hostages and the bodies held by only in a situation where it understands that the cost of maintaining them trumps the benefit. And I think by for example, blocking humanitarian aid, thereby the practical aspect that Mr. Kimmett referred to, selling off those humanitarian aid, making money off of it, making profit off of it, and using it as a cudgel against the Gazan population, Hamas will no longer have that in its grasp. Israel taking control of the humanitarian aid in Gaza and implements what we call the Humanitarian Islands Plan, meaning taking all of the population into designated 10 cities run by the IDF and the UN. Hamas will no longer have civil control over Gaza. This takes a major sting out of its or quiver out of its arsenal. All these things really amount to more and more pressure on Hamas, because Israel cannot possibly agree to commit national suicide in exchange for the hostages. It is ready to pay a very heavy price. The question is, what will Hamas do next? What will be next moves are, and especially what kind of let's say peripheral pressure will the U.S. Put in place? For example, pressure on Egypt to pressure on Hamas, pressure on Qatar as its main sponsor, extraditing Hamas officials from Qatar elsewhere to the United States, for example, pressuring Iran, the main sponsor of Hamas as well. All these things are done to a significant extent, and I have a reason to believe that the Trump administration understands that and will mount pressure in order to release them for relatively favorable conditions to Israel.
We are down to the last quarter of this panel discussion, so let's shift gears and go north to the Syrian and Lebanese arenas. Oded, we have seen in recent days that Israel is quite outspoken in its policy of holding on to buffer zones within Syria's territory, actually trying to carve the area into three strips. The one adjacent to Israel, which is supposed to hold off any attempt to penetrate or to shoot at Israeli targets, and then another strip a bit closer to the center of Damascus, and then another one which is really an area of influence, including the Israeli relationship with the Druze at the Sweda province. It seems as if the world is accepting that, doesn't it?
First of all, the world is now pretty much preoccupied with other issues, mainly what is going to be Trump's next economic move and what's going to be the fate of NATO and Ukraine and so on. So it kind of goes under the radar. Let's not forget there is another factor, which are the Kurds also, that we have some affiliation with it. I think Israel is doing the right thing by moving into some sort of a buffer zone as sort of the consequences of the 7th of October, where you didn't need any armor divisions, you didn't need tanks, you didn't need anything like that. You just took Toyota SUVs, put submachine guns on them, and charge into Israel. This lesson was learned by the Israeli military, and of course, that is why we're acting accordingly. I just want to say something about Julani, if I may. We are right now, Julani is embraced by the West as the savior of Syria. Of course, he's supported by Turkey and so on. And he seems to be quite pragmatic. One of the things that he did is start negotiating with his bitter rivals, the Russians. But nevertheless, having said that, we have to be very careful before we come to a conclusion that he's the good jihadist. We have to be very, very careful regarding that. We have to monitor closely his steps and his next move. We saw this slaughter in Syria of Alawite. I don't think it was initiated by Jolani, but I think it's more of his weakness in establishing Syria as a country. And I think right now Israel is making the right steps, but we should little bit curve down the rhetoric that our ministers are using against Julani as a butcher and a killer and so on. Let's wait a little bit to see what happens.
But this is an impossible task, asking Israeli ministers to tone down the rhetoric. Won't happen. We'll have peace with all of our neighbors before that takes place. General Kimmit, the Lebanese-Israeli negotiations are apparently off to a good start. American mediation, the general in charge of the monitoring group seems to have some traction there. Of course, in addition to the changes in the Lebanese leadership and the fact that Hezbollah was beaten badly. Do you expect to see more of that, and perhaps even bringing the border demarcation talks to fruition?
In the short run, yes. I think there will be some success there. In the long run, Hezbollah is not defeated. It remains an integral part of the political fabric of Lebanon, and it's not going anywhere. I would make a point about Syria, though. I think that you're exactly right about Jolani's past. The West, particularly the United States, is not embracing him. The policy is We hear your words, we see your shoes, we like your suits, but we will judge you not by them, but by your conduct. So far, American intermediation helped with the agreement between Jolani and the SDF and the Kurds in the Northeast. I would expect that Jolani will continue to try to calm down the Alawite community and try to make a deal with them. And he's going to go down to the Druze in Soweto. Likely he will screw up and show his real colors before then, so I don't think Israel needs to worry. But in the unlikely situation where he is able to make peace with the Alawites and possibly make peace with the Druze in the south, I think Israel is going to find itself backed into a corner about withdrawing from the area they've taken if those processes go well.
You know, John Kimmett, your reply just now was so excellent that it makes you a contender for the most precious prize an Israeli can send to an American nowadays, and that is a dozen eggs.
We need them. We need them. We need them to lower the price of eggs in America.
We'll ask Prime Minister Netanyahu to send his personal plane with some 60 tons of eggs, our present to the needy American public. For the time being, General Mark Kimmett, Mr. Or Issachar, Mr. Aded Elam, thank you very much. This has been Israel at War, an update from TV7 Israel News in Jerusalem, and we will be back early tomorrow, actually, and then the next day, and then early next week. For the time being, shalom from Jerusalem.
My name is Doron Gavish, and my background, 30 years of serving in the Israeli Air Force. My last job, I was the commander of the Israeli Air and Missile Defense during the introduction of the Iron Dome to the defense of Israel. All of this allows me really to be part of the team here in TV7. It is super important to have such a platform. We talk about the global situation, we talk about Israel and those different angles which are relevant to the discussion.